I'm really glad I get a chance to introduce Dave Ripley. I was 23 years old, just out of college. My college coach named Chuck Patton. It was late in the year. I'd already blown a couple interviews. And he called me in one day. He said, "You want to coach, right?" I go, "Yeah, I want to coach." He goes, "There's an assistant coaching job in Riceville, Iowa, and I think you should do it." Which meant you're doing it. And I just said, "Okay, where's Riceville?" And it was the best decision I made, because I learned what coaching was all about. I thought coaching was teaching moves. That's the only thing I was good at that time. And I had no idea what really running a wrestling program was all about, and also learned that it's not just a wrestling program. You try to build a wrestling family. And that's what I found out was at Riceville. I was a driver ed teacher. And by the way, Howard County or Mitchell, there's no stoplights. Couldn't get to one in time by the end of the period. So when I say learn what coaching is all about, here's what it's all about. First thing we did is Coach Ripley took me to Cresco to get my bus license. I didn't know why. I didn't even question. I said, "Okay, we'll do that." But here's the day. I never worked more hours in my life. From there, I went to head coach at Charles City, to the top assistant coach at Northern Iowa, to the head coach at Wartburg. Never put in more hours than at Riceville. And he was doing, I was his first assistant, he was doing this all on his own before this. Because first thing you found out you do, first we cleaned the mat. The last period of the day, I drove all day driver ed. Then 7th period, the last period of the day, you had junior high practice. Okay, well, you got an hour. I might have this, correct me if I'm wrong. You had about an hour because they had to get on the bus. You couldn't go more than that, so you better be organized and do that. Then we had the varsity practice. And they had a certain time they had to be on the bus. And then I thought we were done. God, man, whew. I said, "Coach, come on in here." We pick up all the towels in the locker room. We put them in the washing machine. He didn't make me do this, but I know he had to come in and put them in the dryer the next morning. Then I remember my first time I'm by myself. He said, you're going to Forest City with the JV, and Coach Ripley's taking the varsity somewhere." I said, "All right." Okay. I was young. I stayed out too late that night. But I get there. I'm there before 7. The kids are getting on the bus. I'm waiting. I'm thinking, I'll probably get some sleep eye on the way. It's Forest City. About 10 after 7, I said, one of the kids said, "Who are we waiting for?" I go, "The bus driver." They said, "Coach, you're the bus driver." Then it hit me. Okay, I know why I went to get my bus license. But I'm so serious when I say I learned how to coach. And it wasn't about teaching moves. It's about not only all that stuff, but caring about kids, investing in kids' lives. One night we had a snowstorm. We're supposed to have a meet. And I go, "Are we going to have a meet?" He goes, "They'll show up." I'm talking about the people. They came with tractors and snowmobiles. But from that point on, I value our maintenance people who do our mats, my secretary, the trainer, because we also did the taping. I mean, all those things that you just take for granted somewhere, and here's a guy that's building a program by himself. And it wasn't just a program, it was a family. And I know there's a lot of people from Riceville out here, and I really, really admire this man. And really appreciate the value I got. I was there 1 year. how much I took away from. He doesn't know how much that changed my thought process and the rest of my career. So thank you, Coach Ripley. I got one more thing to do. This guy's touched a lot of lives. One of them is Josh Burns, who's one of our state representatives. And his note is, "I'm sorry I was unable to make this event. Congrats to Rip, as this is much deserved. The impact he has made on his wrestlers' lives has been great. I would not be where I am today if it has not been for people like Rip in my life. Congratulations, Josh Burns." And there's this, this is a certificate of recognition that was done in the State House to Coach Dave Ripley, Riceville High School wrestling team of Charles City. It having been made known to the House of Representatives by its Honorable Representative Josh Burns that Coach David Ripley deserves recognition for being inducted in the Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame. Now, therefore, in consideration of the foregoing, the House of Representatives does hereby extend its congratulations this third day of April 2013. Congratulations, Coach.
Got to get my teleprompter out here. First, before I get started here, I'd like to congratulate Jim on, 10 national championships. Maybe he should change his Facebook page to just Mr. Wartburg. From there. Because he really raised the bar for the Iowa Conference Wrestling for Division 3, and he had more of an impact on Riceville Wrestling and Charles City Wrestling than he probably ever knows. His attitude, just get her done. He sort of originated that, and it worked with our kids because that's pretty much the Riceville attitude, just get her done. I'd also like to congratulate the founders of this hall, going clear back to 1970. It keeps the history and the stories of Iowa wrestling alive, and I think we all need to know where we came from, so maybe we'll have an idea where we're going. I'd like to thank the selection committee for including myself, but more for including Riceville in this hall, because it really is a Riceville honor. Got some people with me. They're all sitting here at this table. Got stepson Tony and Michelle Krameyer and their two granddaughters, Madison and Laura. Got my son Darren and his wife Beverly. Got my wife with me, Shirley. Going back to son and daughters, I can't imagine what it'd be like to be in the same school and have mother or father to be a teacher, and then to have father as a coach. I'm sure they didn't have all good things to say about me in Riceville. And evidently, they must have endured it, survived it, because they are both now teachers and coaches, even though my son coaches in Minnesota. But he's well experienced, because I think he started coaching when he was about 3.
Tom Brands and Dan Gable both know I'm a big Iowa.
Okay, all right. Go Hawks. But you really need a big support system. You need it, I don't care what you're doing, you need a support system. And probably in wrestling, you need a support system maybe more than any other endeavor that you might be in. And that always starts, I'm sure, with your parents. They give you the work ethic. They give you the rights and wrongs. Basically, I guess the rule in our house was you got in it, you get out of it, but don't lie, and pay the consequences. And that seemed to work for us. Then you've got to have a wife, and I was blessed with 2 wives that shared the passion that it takes to be involved in wrestling and coaching of wrestling. because it's certainly not a 9-to-5 job. Sometimes it's 8 days a week. Now it's almost year-round. So you have to have a wife that will take that passion. You know, they run the hospitality room, they run the video cameras, they cook breakfast for wrestlers before they go to tournaments. They too have to sit in the stands. And again, they have to endure why did he do that, or why didn't he do that, and just sort of smile. Of course, maybe in some cases they probably agreed with the guy. But they just kept quiet about it. So I've been blessed twice in that way. Then you've got to have the wrestling parents in the town behind you and support you. And there at Riceville long enough that we had parents, and pretty soon we had grandparents, and they'd all been through the system, and they all supported us. And sometimes I needed a lot of support because sometimes I went eyeball to eyeball with some of the administrators. And thank you, wrestling parents, that stood up and supported me there and kept me also on the straight and narrow, because there were some controversies. But we also had a lot of really good people at Riceville in the school system. Started out with the first superintendent, Mr. J. Had a good athletic director, Principal Goldberg, and then luckily we come along with Mr. Kohlberg and had Mr. D. Riceville people would know who all of these people are, but they were just great to work with. We had lots of teachers, and we as coaches, whether it was football, basketball, whatever, we all got along. We didn't work against each other, and that was really good. And I see a couple of them here, Rass and Hackney. They were just great to work with, work for, because in Riceville, if you were wrestling coach, that meant you were also 7th and 8th grade football coach, you had junior high wrestling, you had junior high track, in the summertime you had 7th through 12th baseball, and that's just the way it is. And imagine that you get paid for it. It's great. Also had a lot of really great assistants. Mentioned Jim here. I was looking hard for an assistant, and I knew that I needed a hands-on coach. So I wanted to get somebody out of college that could come in the room and deal with these kids and really keep them honest. And I knew that Jim was available. I called Dotson. Dotson says, if you let him coach, I'll get him up there. And I said, I'll let him coach. So I sort of told Jim what I wanted done, what we should cover, and so on. And like he said, he showed the technique, and he took that right down to the 7th graders. And well, you look at that stretch in there, it was a pretty good stretch with a lot of good people that were motivated by Jim Miller. We had some other ones. Lindsay Ackerman was there for a while. Brian Reimers, I call him Mr. Four-Time. We have 2 4-time state champions. Leo Pospical came in at a very hard and crucial time in my program at that time and carried us through. And another coach that really contributed a great deal to Riceville, Dave Guy, who's out here in the audience tonight. So it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of support. Then I had to sort of ask myself, how did I get here? And you know, all of you out there, you know you make choices. You make a lot of choices. Some of them are pretty good choices, and some of them you're just glad you survived. But probably the key to me was about mid-December. I'm playing basketball. We're doing pretty good. I'm playing enough, but I just had enough of basketball. I walked downstairs at the old manual arts, and wrestling started out. Basketball has never really thanked me, because that's the last time that Charles City ever went to the state tournament in basketball. But they haven't thanked me yet. If some of you can remember the manual arts at Charles City, and I'm sure there were a lot of you that wrestled there at some point in time in your life, or you were in there, but that was really the center of Charles City Athletics. When I was in grade school there at Central, we were in the bottom floor of the manual arts, and football team still practiced there on our playground. We had basketball there. We had an indoor track up above. Baseball worked out there in the spring. So for us kids in the grade school, we just, we became gym rats. The YMCA was only a block away, so that was there. And, you sort of stand around behind the coaches, and you listen to these coaches talk about this kid, that kid, and what he should be doing, and why he ain't doing that, and you hear a lot of other things too. That maybe was where the seed got planted that maybe this is really what I want to do. When I realized that you can make a living doing this. So that might be the start. And there were a lot of people there that were, I don't know, I guess you call them mentors or whatever, but one of the great people of Charles City was the director at the Y, CSMO. We had Curly Steinkamp, Truman Manship. And one guy that really kept me in line was a 4th grade social studies teacher named Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson we'd play basketball with him in the morning, we'd play softball or football with him after school. But in school, he was also the boys' counselor. And I'm sure that some of you are old enough to have gotten counseled like I did, where you went into this little room, the counselor's room, and they sort of picked you up so they could talk to you eyeball to eyeball. And you could kind of regulate how serious it was by the pulse on his neck. If that was really pumping, you better pay attention. Of course, when you walked out of there, the room said janitor. You got the counseling. I really thank him for it, because when we walked out of that room, it was all over, and we were right back to playing baseball or whatever after school. Some of the thoughts that I remember about wrestling there in Charles City, and you need to know where you come from. You talk about facilities and so on and everything that you have, and Mr. Miller was talking about his secretaries and all that stuff. I can remember at the manual arts, it was down in the basement or the bottom floor. You rolled up the mats, you opened up the window, you carried the mats out, carried them through the snow, around to the front, up the stairs, laid them out, tied them together, put the cover on it, and then the next morning, first period phys ed class, got to do that all in reverse, since Curly was also the PE coach or manager. I can remember going to the first matches. There was a break between periods. I might be wrong, but I think there was, like between the first and second period was like boxing. And they had the chair set there. And I can remember a couple of guys, managers, would have the guy's arms, they'd be shaking them, trying to get some life back in them, each arm. Curly would be straddling over the top of the guy, yelling in his face, and then they go back out there. If the guy had bad ears, he had a war surplus fighter helmet that he wore, like a bombardier pilot. The other great guy that really started wrestling in Charles City was heavyweight Bob Blunt. And of course, the only wrestling that most of us saw was on Channel 7. And Bob Blunt, if he could get in there, and he could get that guy picked up, he'd put him into the airplane spin and slam him down. Bob didn't care. He just shook hands, took the loss, and walked off. But I'll tell you, everybody in Charles City went to the wrestling meets, and it packed the crowd because they wanted to see the airplane spin. So you got to start somewhere. Other things that I remember from high school wrestling, and this sort of made me a team coach in aspect. We're going to wrestle Brett, and you talk about starting programs and mentioned Waukegan Valley and stuff. And, you got to take these little steps, and we did this at Riceville as well. And you got to beat this guy, and pretty soon you get knocked back here, and then you got to go back up until you get up here where you want to be. We hadn't beaten Brett. Brett was a really big power, and we go over to Brett, and the gyms weren't as big as they are now, and the crowd is packed in there. They got folding chairs all the way around the mat. You can hardly get to the mat. You remember those mats that used to be behind the chairs for you to warm up? Well, we get weighed in. Curly comes over to me and says, if you can stay off your back, I think we can beat these guys. I had no idea what he was talking about. So I figured that was kind of the plan to begin with. So I get back there and I'm warming up. And you got to remember that this is before political correctness. And I got all these Brit people telling me what was going to happen to me when I got out of the match. I didn't know anything about one wrestler from another, but it turns out that this guy was Chuck Conway, who was a pretty good wrestler for Brit. And their coach must have told him that if you can pin this guy, we can win the meet. So we go out there, we're flying all over the place, we're into the crowd. And like I said, political correctness is not there. People in Brit would throw me back onto the mat. They would go at it. But he did not pin me, and we won the meet. Another big step for Charles City. So I like to think about that. Another thing that I learned is how mental wrestling is. Maybe some of you knew Dave Jensen. He's not with us anymore, but Dave was a good friend of mine and workout partner at Charles City. We go down to West Waterloo. We're down there waiting for the weigh-ins to start. And we're all crowded around there. And pretty soon here comes this noise. It's Elu. Elu's coming in. Dotson's shoving people out of the way. He's got Reesby, Hoosman, McDonald, and a whole raft of Elu wrestlers, and they were tough. And they go up to the scales and weigh in. But they pushed Jensen out of the way. And I just saw a light come on in Dave's eyes. And he said, I'm going to kick their, you know what. And I think Dave Jensen was like 5-5 at the time. I mean, we just average. They put him on line 7, which means he gets the number 2 seed. Another kid from Elu. Jensen sticks him, and Jensen never looked back. Because he went on to Iowa State, then down to Iowa teachers, and but it was just mental. He just turned him around, one little thing, and that was something that you could kind of coach into kids. That it is a mental sport. How did I get into wrestling? I went to Upper Iowa, worked on weekends and so on and so forth. But one day they had a meet. I'm a sophomore. I go over and watch a meet. I think these guys aren't really much better than I am. So I decided I'd go out the next year. Worked out, made the team, met a lot of good friends, still got some good friends. In fact, one just stopped in the other day on his way back to Colorado. So it is a family thing and a lot of good things. But it did get me my first job. Because in those days, they hired you, you're a football coach will find you something to teach. In this case, they needed a wrestling coach and they needed a baseball coach. We'll find something for you to teach. So that's the way I went to Lamont. But in those days, we were going through a lot of consolidation, and those things are pretty rough. Didn't get the head job at Starmont, so I moved on to Tama Toledo, and they're going together. And I'm thinking, I'm going to give this one more shot. And I wanted to get back up into northeast Iowa where I thought wrestling was important. And I'll give it one more shot, or I'm going to find something else to do. I went to Raceville, and really a lot of good people there, and it worked out pretty well for me. But I thought if I'm going to coach kids, I better learn something. Like you mentioned, a double and a switch. Now I had figure 4 too, but they outlawed that. So then we got books. So I go out and I get a book. One of my first books was a takedown book by Bobby Douglas. And I used that a lot. Then, fortunately, Dr. Nichols started clinics at Iowa State and Iowa. Then Briggs started some at UNI. And you just went around to meets and watched kids. I probably stole something from nearly every coach or wrestler in this room as I watched their kids at tournaments. I see what they would do, and we take it back. Waterloo, I look out there down in Bosco, we got a wrist cradle. I see sitting, we got a West Waterloo drag. Arlie taught me how to stand up, stomp my foot, and yell. But I never knew who he was yelling at. He was yelling at me, his wrestler, or the referee. Referees. There's enough people here in Raceville. They've given me the power to forgive all the referees, all the calls that we didn't agree with. But we ain't forgetting. Wanted to mention, then I went to clinics, took kids to clinics. I get down to West Waterloo, it's a freestyle clinic. They got some mats out, and I take some kids and I dress out. And these clinicians, they always like us little guys to demonstrate on. So this guy gets a hold of me and he's going to put a leg lace tilt. So he puts it on, and then somebody from Riceville says, "Can we see that again?" But this time this guy's got it figured out. Want to see it again? How about again? I don't know how many times we went back and forth across that band. I'm about 99% sure that that clinician was Tom Peckham. Can you imagine him doing that? The guy I always liked to demonstrate on was Scrub Foster. So all the people from Riceville will know who Scrub Foster is and how I used to like to demonstrate on him. One of the guys I really like to go and scout out would be Cedar Falls. Keith Young, he's not here anymore, but I would make sure if Cedar Falls was in the area, I would go and I'd get there before the JV match was over, by the time it started, because in those mats behind there, the JV kid would come off, Keith Young would have him back there, and he'd be putting this on him, that on him, telling him what he did and didn't do. I'd be up in the crowd scouting it out. And that's what we worked on the next day of practice, so that's sort of the way you go. But in closing, I would just like to say that, you know, the honor that I'm up here receiving right now really belongs to the wrestlers from Riceville, and I really want to thank, I mean, you know, all of the wrestlers that really excelled, but I would really like to thank the wrestlers that came into that room, came here every day, gave everything they had, they stuck with it, they added to the team, and they were the workout partners, because that's kind of where I came from. So, in closing, I'd just like to remind everyone that when you're probably indulging in an adult beverage and you're talking about Iowa high school wrestling, I would just like you to remember the Wildcats. Yeah.